Life.Church created this podcast because we all need healthy conversations with real people. So this podcast is here to help you start real conversations with your life group, friends, and family. Now, on to the show.
Welcome to the You've Heard It Said podcast. This is Jason.
And this is Allie.
And I have some moderately sized questions for us today.
Moderately sized question? What does that even mean?
Like they're big. They're kind of hard questions.
So then why didn't you just say you had big questions?
Because I didn't want to scare you.
Okay, well now I'm nervous.
So how much money is enough?
Oh, I mean, that is a big question. Like, what do you mean?
I think I'm going to leave it open. How do you know when you have enough?
Enough of what? Like enough of something?
You know, money or time or just enough. Like, how do you know when enough is enough? Like, what is enough?
It's such a meta question. Like, I don't know. I think it's hard to answer. Having enough is probably like the Goldilocks principle, like the children's story, Goldilocks.
I'm waiting for you to tell me about it.
Yeah. Okay. So like the porridge, you know, she like goes in and the porridge.
Is this the one where someone, like the wolves ate the porridge?
I don't know that there's wolves in the story. There's bears in the story. Okay. And she goes in and there's like a porridge that's too hot. And then there's one that's too cold. And then there's one that's like just right. And so like basically having enough money would be like the right porridge. It's like having what you need to meet your needs.
Okay, before Goldilocks, you told me it was hard to answer. Tell me more about it being hard to answer.
Well, because I tend to think about enough as like, yeah, I have what I need and then a little bit extra.
Mm-hmm. I think most of us actually think of it that way. Like, if I have extra, then I can share, you know?
Right.
Especially in the Western world. I know that, like, I tend to come at money and time and resources this way.
Right. And I mean, I think there's some merit to that. Like, I don't think saving or investing or being a good steward is wrong. Being a good steward, not steward.
Being a good
steward.
This is, yes, everyone should be a good steward. If you're going to be steward, you should be a good one.
Anyways, I don't think saving or investing or being
you got this.
Or being a good steward is wrong. Like, I think it's really wise to have a rainy day fund, but it is kind of convicting because feeling like I don't have enough is probably the number one thing that keeps me from being generous.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Like, I've always thought of sharing as using your extra to help others to have enough, which actually kind of ties into some of my questions that I have, which are what holds me back from being generous? And when the church talks about generosity, are they just trying to get my money? I mean, I know that my church is not just trying to get my money, but I felt that way before. And sometimes it feels uncomfortable or even manipulative maybe to talk about generosity, especially if the person listening feels like they don't have enough.
For sure. But this is kind of a weird thing about me, but I actually really like talking about generosity.
Okay. Tell me more about that.
Honestly, I really think it's because I feel the most connected to God when I talk about generosity.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so I just feel like the times where I feel like I've heard from God the most have been money related. So like when I was in college and I tithed for the first time, it was like a super small amount, like $7 or something like that. And the week after I did that, somebody sent me a link to this job and I had been looking for a job and I was definitely underqualified for it and I got it. And then the person who was my boss actually attends our Life.Church Stillwater location and was just like the best human ever. And so it just really felt like, you know, I could see like God honoring my obedience. And then I've also had times where I've been really stressed out about money or my budget and like a check would just show up in the mail, like for some crazy reason. And then there was one time where I literally woke up in the middle of the night and I felt like God told me to give somebody a very specific amount of money. And when I did it, it was like exactly the amount that they needed to pay for a bill plus a little bit extra. And it really built both of our faith because I'd heard stories like that, but I'd never been a part of one. And so for me, I look back at that experience and it reminds me a lot about prayer and that God can speak to us.
This is making a lot of sense. I actually have an uncle who says money is how we spend our time the second time around. So like if I spend my time working, they give me money and then I spend the money. It's how I spend my time the second time around. And so money is a way to spend your life. And if money is a way to spend your life, then of course God cares about it. Like, of course he's going to use it to talk to you and grow you. So I love that you mentioned that generosity increases our faith because like we talk about it often as how generosity is going to benefit others, but probably the biggest benefit is like how it changes us, you know? So maybe someone's listening and you have heard all kinds of things said about generosity, even what we've been saying already, and you're still feeling skeptical. I get it. We thought that one of the best ways to illustrate this would be to find more stories from more people in all different situations of how generosity has built their faith. And I think you guys are going to love these stories.
For sure. And we're also going to get to hear from our friend Sam about how generosity can be an act of justice. And our kid theologian, Andy Burton, is back. And I just really like it when kids can make topics like generosity so much more simple than we do as adults.
So I have one more question.
Okay.
How many Chick-fil-A nuggets are enough?
Oh my gosh, the limit does not exist, but do not get me started on that. Anyways, here's the stories that we think you'll really like.
Generosity is always something that's been very important to me. And one of those areas that I've always found kind of fun and exciting whenever like I'll get into a drive-thru and I just feel like the Holy Spirit prompts me like, hey, pay for the person behind you. And you don't know who's going to drive up behind you and you don't really know what their story is. And it's one of those things where you're generous without actually ever getting to meet that person and never really fully appreciated it until I was on the receiving end of a situation like that. So back in August, I just moved with my, at the time, 1-year-old daughter, and almost immediately when she started daycare, she would get sick. I remember one weekend I went and picked her up on a Friday and she got so sick so quickly and I was freaked out and frustrated and like just upset because you don't know what to do. My daughter had never been sick like that in her whole life. And so by 2:00 in the morning when I'd been sitting holding my child all night, I ended up needing to take her to the emergency room. So we sat for several hours while they were figuring out what's going on and what to do and how to help her. And I just remember feeling so alone in that moment and so scared. And I just thought, okay, it's 6:00 in the morning. Of course, no one's out at that time. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to stop at McDonald's and get just a cup of coffee and a sandwich. And pulled into the drive-thru, placed my order, and just didn't even think anything of it until I pulled up to the window. And I remember the attendant there saying, oh, is this your order? And I said, yeah. And he goes, the car in front of you paid for your meal. And he handed it to me. And it's just something that's so small and so insignificant. But for me in that moment, it was like the Holy Spirit just reaching down and saying, you might not know anyone here, but I do. And I see you, and you're never alone. And I never appreciated until that moment what must have been going on for the people that pulled up in the drive-thru behind me.
I was working 3 jobs just to make ends meet, and one of those jobs happened to be Pizza Hut. I had a coworker at Pizza Hut. His car broke down, which is what he needed to work. This guy definitely wasn't a follower of Christ. We connected, we were friends. God called me to give him a pretty decent chunk of money during that season, and I was just like, I don't know how I'm going to make ends meet if I give this money. And it's probably one of the few times God has spoke to me in a very, very clear way. So I wrote a check and gave it to him. He was extremely appreciative. And I wish I had a story where he came to Christ, and I knew that, but that's not necessarily what happened. What I do know is that the next day I got a little over $1,000 check in the mail from a previous employer because they had forgotten to pay me some commission checks. Just to see God provide for him and me during that season just allowed me to just say, hey, yeah, you got this, and trust him with those things.
Last year, so that would be in 2021, I had been really working hard on managing my resources. So for context, I'm a single parent, and I lost most of my support system at the end of 2020 and had really felt like God continued to put it on my heart to understand what it means to be faithful with my resources, my time, my finances, in serving other people, and also just pursuing financial freedom. And I was on track to pay off my debt in the middle of 2021. So in April of 2021, I was so amped up. I was like, I feel great at work. I feel really good on my financial goals. I had this timeline laid out, and I was like, okay, by August, I think if I'm really, really careful with my finances, I can be financially free. And then my car stopped working, and the transmission was just totally dead. And at that point, I had to ask myself, like, does it make more sense to buy a new vehicle, or does it make more sense just go ahead and rebuild this one? And with the mileage on the car, it didn't make sense. I was crushed. I was like, okay, this really sets me back. And I was trying to figure out what to do. And a friend let me use their car for a couple weeks, which really helped me and gave me some time to think about that. And someone who I work with, who's just very prayerful person, stopped me one day and she said, I've been meaning to talk to you. I feel like you're really overwhelmed. You want to tell me what's going on? Finally, I told her, here's what's going on with the car. I'm worried about my finances and I don't know what to do. And I don't have family here. And I felt like I was on track, and now I'm not on track. She prayed with me, but she also said, hey, I don't know if you know this, but our team has a prayer channel. Have you thought about putting it in there? And she was like, I just really encourage you, let the team pray for you because God can do anything. And I was like, okay. And I thought about it, and I took a couple of days. Then I just shared what was going on with my car and how challenging that was. It was really crazy because over the next 2 weeks, 3 different families reached out to me on the team, and they just said, hey, we've been praying for you, but also there have been times in our life where we've been in need and people have really blessed us. And we just wanted to know, can we send you a little bit of money to help out? I told them yes, and I really appreciated that, and thank you. And I was amazed because between 3 families, they gave me more than enough for a down payment and covered a quarter of the cost of a new vehicle. And it was a good and very reliable vehicle. And I was just blown away.
So part of our story, we first got married. I had a really good job. We were both working. And our family ended up having some huge crises where we ended up quitting our jobs, moving. We're from Philadelphia. We moved back to there. And we weren't really sure how we were going to pay our bills. We had a lot going on. And one crazy side thing that I'd started doing, I'm a software engineer, but I was entering these random t-shirt contests. I just designed a random t-shirt for some online contests. And I'm not a good artist or anything, but one of my designs ended up selling really well. We lived off t-shirt sales for 2 years. And we were able to minister to our family through some really intense needs and losses. And it was God working in a really clear way, kind of telling us, reminding us over and over again, I'm going to take care of you. When you have that background of faith of seeing God provide for you, that experience over and over again of the joy of giving and seeing that, in fact, you can stay afloat even after giving generously, it bolsters that too. And so part of our experience in receiving has been regular paychecks, but also God spontaneously, whimsically blessing us. And he's called us to do that exact same thing. Kristen and I have the joy of both serving on the YouVersion team. And so that means we get to connect with a ton of our coworkers. And we have these shared channels in our team's chat. And there's a prayer request channel. And one of the needs that came up was one of our friends on the team had some unexpected financial needs. She had some car trouble. She has a young daughter and is working full time. And as soon as we heard that need, Kristen and I, whenever we see a need like that, we know we're on the same page with it. And the question for us together in our marriage isn't, are we going to give to this? It's how much are we going to give? And so I knew Kristen was reading the same thing. She knew I was reading it. And so when we talked after reading that message, we asked each other, like we always do, what's the number in your head? How much are we going to give to this? And I don't know if it was the exact number, but it was pretty close, like it usually is. It's amazing how God is there prompting us to be generous together. And so Kristen gave her the money, and it feels amazing to be able to do that, having been in a place where we've had needs before, and especially teammates that are your friends and your family too, to be able to bless them as we're blessed.
We didn't go into too much detail, but the same day that Brian had won the design contest was the same day that his dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And at first we were so surprised that, wow, we won this prize money. And then a couple hours later, we actually heard terrible news. So like bad surprise. Really, God's provision was there. And so when I see someone who is worried about money or just in need, to be able to be a part of that surprise that, hey, God's gonna give this to you, God's gonna provide for you, is really special. It kind of stirs up a deep appreciation for God's unconditional, unending grace, good gifts, and also his joy. And so after we gave her the money, she purchased the car and sent us a picture of her with a new car. And we were able to celebrate with her the gift that God was giving her through others. It was really sweet to see her show what it meant to her. And sometimes you see that and sometimes you don't. But in this case, just really enjoyed that picture and seeing her full of joy and relief and gratitude. It was beautiful to be a part of that.
About 2 years ago, my wife and I, we had a kind of surprise tax bill come our way. It was $7,000 what we owed the IRS. And that was an amount of money that we had no idea how we were going to come up with and to pay for. We're starting to think about getting second jobs and looking elsewhere, figuring out what we could cut, but honestly just didn't know how we were going to do it because it was due soon and we had to figure out creative ways to pay it. Well, we were praying with our life group and shared our situation with them and just asked for their prayers and guidance as we were kind of navigating the season. And a few weeks later, one of the life group members reached out to me and said, "Hey, Stephen, my wife and I, we feel like we just need to help you cover some of this. We're getting a tax refund of $4,000 and we want to give it to you guys and to help towards your tax payment." And my wife and I just didn't know what to say. We were just so overwhelmed with gratitude, and you could just tell like God was behind this. God saw the timing of everything so perfectly to work in our lives and their lives. And then thankfully with that gift and then through other different situations God orchestrated, we were able to pay the whole thing earlier than expected. And it was just such a cool reminder that despite how low or how much of a gap you might feel that there is, God can meet it. He can exceed it. And he works through his people so often to do it. And sometimes we get to be on the receiving end, and very often we get to be on the giving end of that, of how can we be that kind of blessing to someone else. And a lot of times it's not going to be $4,000 or whatever, but whatever generosity God prompts out of me, I want to be faithful to do it.
So several years ago, just in some time of reflection, realized I really didn't care about people in other countries. I know that sounds terrible to say, and I felt terrible about it, but I really just noticed that I didn't pray for people in other countries or really think about that all that much. And I thought about what Jesus said about where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And so my husband and I decided to put our treasure someplace and see if that would help lead our heart there. And so we started sponsoring some children through a ministry in Burkina Faso, Africa. And shocker, what Jesus said was true. It did actually awaken my heart to the joy of being able to fund a church there to show those children Jesus. You know, it really just opened up not just my heart, but each of the people in my family, my 3 kids, my husband and I, each had a child that we wrote letters to and things like that. And so really looking at where I put my treasure did lead my heart and shape my heart was exactly as Jesus promised.
So these stories are incredible reminders of what we can learn about God through generosity. And now we wanted to see what the Bible has to say about all this. So we brought in our good friend and content teammate, Sam Larrabee. And who knows, maybe we'll even make this a recurring segment. Maybe we'll call it Theology and Tea with Sam Larrabee.
Don't worry by saying, "What will we eat? What will we drink? Or what will we wear?" These things dominate the thoughts of unbelievers, but your heavenly Father already knows all your needs. Seek the kingdom of God above all else and live righteously, and He will give you everything you need. Sounds nice, right? These words from Matthew 6 are some of Jesus' most famous, but they also raise some questions. Like, how can God know our needs while 1 in 5 people on Earth lack adequate housing? Or what about the 800 million people who lack access to food and clean drinking water? So does Jesus simply not understand how the world works? I don't think so. Instead, I think he's showing us a better way of understanding what it means for God to provide enough. Throughout the Bible, God miraculously provides for people in desperate need. Hagar and her son Ishmael found water in the desert. God fed the prophet Elijah while he was on the run from people who wanted him killed. And probably the most famous example is God testing his people, the Israelites, by giving them more than enough. God had rescued his people from slavery, but later they accused God of bringing them into the wilderness to starve. In Exodus 16, God responds by saying, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way, I will test them and see whether they follow my instructions." Can you see the test? God would provide more than enough, but they're only supposed to take enough to meet their needs for each day. God didn't want them to starve, but he also didn't want them to live with too much excess. So it's a test, but it's also an invitation to live with the simple trust that God would meet their needs each day. God showed his people that it's better to only take what you need, even when you have the opportunity to take more. But why? The author of Psalm 112 writes about how God would provide wealth to people who trust him. But that wealth isn't for luxury. Instead, it's to provide for others in the community. Verse 5 even says that those who are generous support and sustain justice. That's because everyone on earth was created in God's image, so we all deserve to live with dignity. God designed the world to provide enough for everyone to share, regardless of race, gender, religion, or work ethic. Unfortunately, past and present injustices like sexism, racism, war, and greed cause environments where some have too much, while others have less than enough. That's why generosity is justice. It's partnering with God to restore the world to the way it was meant to be, a place where everyone has enough. Paul puts these ideas together when he spoke about wealth and generosity in 2 Corinthians 9, where he said, "God will generously provide all you need. Then you will always have everything you need and plenty left over to share with others. As the scriptures say, they share freely and give generously to the poor. Their good deeds will be remembered forever." So what will God provide? What you need. And everything that's left over? It's shared with others. How is it shared? Freely and generously, just like God, who provides for people everywhere and wants everyone to have enough. So let's go back to Matthew 6. Jesus wasn't being naive. Instead, he was inviting us to a better way of living, regardless of our financial situation. For those who have more than enough, Jesus invites us to remember that everything belongs to God and that every person deserves to live with dignity. For those who live with less than enough, Jesus invites us to trust that God will provide, either directly or through the generosity of others. We catch a glimpse of what the world could look like if we all lived with Jesus' same simple trust. In Acts 4, it says, "All the believers were united in heart and mind, and they felt that what they owned was not their own. So they shared everything they had. The apostles testified powerfully to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and God's great blessing was upon them all. There were no needy people among them, because those who owned land or houses would sell them and bring the money to the apostles to give to those in need." So as we continue to talk about generosity, I want you to imagine what your community could look like if everyone lived this way. What if each person lived with the simple trust that God would provide enough for each day? While it may seem crazy, it is possible to live this way. And it all starts when we stop asking, "How much should I give?" and instead ask, "How much is enough for me today?"
Thank you so much for coming back to the podcast. We're very excited to talk to you about money.
Oh, that's fun.
I think once we get into the questions, maybe you'll have some good ideas to share with us, so don't be too worried about it. Cool. Okay, so the first one is, what do you think it means to be generous?
I think it means whenever you have a sharing amount, you shouldn't just keep it to yourself so you can have extra. Like, say, money. If, say, you had $100 and you only needed $50 to buy something, you could give your other $50 to someone who really needs it.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. Okay, so can you tell us about a time when you gave something to someone else?
Yes, I can. I have these neighbors who are having a really tough time. This wasn't me, this was really my whole family. They're having a tough time right now, and we just want to help them and pray for them. And we've been taking our time, and even time can be like generous. Like, it doesn't have to be something that you give to them. It can be taking time out of your day or something like that. My parents also made dinner for them one time. I think that's a really good example.
How did you feel whenever you were able to do that for them?
I felt great. Some people would be disappointed. You're like, oh, I just bought this chocolate and now I have to give it to someone who's not me and who might not share it with me. That's like a bummer, but you feel good whenever you do it most of the time.
Do you think, like in that case of the chocolate bar, like what do you think is better? Getting a chocolate bar or getting to share a chocolate bar?
Sharing, for sure. There are more chocolate bars in the world than the one that you bought. You can know that you love that thing and you gave it to them. And generosity isn't whenever you don't like something and then you're just saying you're being really generous by giving it to someone who needs it. Being generous is giving something that you love or time with someone that you actually enjoyed.
That's a really good point. I've never thought about it that way, but you're exactly right. Have you ever wanted to give something to someone, but also not wanted to give something to someone?
Yeah, that happens sometimes. You know, the feeling that you'll get after you give it to them will be really nice, but you'll also be like, well, I could have had a lot of fun with that too.
What do you do in those situations?
Well, I think, is it more important that you made someone else happy and then you'll be happy after that? I think that's most important.
You're saying you need to think about the other person first and then think about your own happiness.
Because that's how God thought about us.
Yeah, you're right. Thank you so much for coming and letting us ask you lots of questions about generosity. I think you had a ton of good things to say. I think everyone is going to listen to your words and be really inspired to be more generous and also to be a lot more grateful for the generosity that they get to have.
Thank you.
So I'm still reflecting on everything that our friend Sam said, and it reminds me of this quote that I heard from the Bible Project. They were talking about how in the Garden of Eden, the serpent convinced Eve that God wasn't enough. In this beautiful, perfect world with everything she could ever need, she believes the lie that God's holding out on her by withholding fruit from one tree. And so then they said this quote, "Generosity is a rebellious response to the lie that there's never enough."
That's really good. And I'm still reflecting on how to be a good steward.
Oh my God.
You know, like if that was my name, how could I be a good one? But okay, seriously, that's really good. So much of trying to figure out if I personally have enough has to do with thinking like, how do I make sure I provide for myself? You know? And so if that's not the goal, if the goal is like getting to know and follow God and letting him use my whole life to love others, then having enough is based more on who he is and what he provides than it is like me providing enough for myself. So back to that question, how much money is enough?
I mean, I don't think we can answer it. Like, I think that is a question everybody has to ask God for themselves. And the last thing that we want is for people to hear this episode and then just feel shame about their behaviors. I think a healthy conviction is one thing. Like, that's usually the specific behavior that you're like, yeah, maybe I should change that. But shame is usually this general sense of like everything that I've done and everything that I've done with my money is wrong. And that's just not the message that we want you to have.
Yeah, so I've thought about this before, like where I don't feel like I have a lot of money, but where I live in the world makes it kind of seem like I have a lot of money. And so then I ask God, why do I have this much money?
Yeah.
And I think that's a great question. Rather than how much is enough, maybe ask God, why do I have what I have? What can I do with it?
Right. And Something else I want to mention too is sometimes we might feel stuck because we feel like we can't be generous. You know, like money is tight. Maybe inflation is hitting you really hard and you have this mountain of debt to pay off. But I think you can still live a generous life because generosity, like we talked about earlier, is this whole life response to the gospel. So you can be generous with your time, with your skills, with your words, and with your resources. And the other thing that Sam's talk made me think about was how the early church emphasized sharing. And I think that we've lost that to some degree. I think about how in my life group, like we share things with one another. Like I joke that we have this sisterhood of the maternity pants thing going because when someone gets pregnant, we just pass around maternity clothes because why buy them for 9 months when you could just borrow?
Oh, yeah, maternity pants for sure. Can I get in on that? I mean,
you and Stuart can get in on that.
No, I mean, I get it. I think, man, when I think of what is helping me to be more like Jesus, a lot of it comes down to sharing with others. So we've been getting to know the neighbors in our neighborhood, and lately one of them shared half of their day to watch our kids. Recently, we've had another one share their time to help us build a fence. And we've shared vehicles with neighbors or just being able to like give someone a ride. Those things we did for each other were helpful. Like it might have saved us a little money or time or something, but mainly what the outcome is now I know them. You know, when I share something of value to me with them, it gives me an opportunity to also get to know them.
I like it. I think that it goes back to generosity being about a mindset more than it is about the money itself. And so this week, we want you to think about that. And don't just think about it, but talk about it with your friends, your family, or your life group. And just ask one another, how much is enough? What's keeping me from being generous? And how could you start being more generous with your time and your money and your life?
So those are obviously some moderately sized or large questions. And we're going to provide even more questions like those in the conversation guide, along with a bonus guide on how to discover ways to be generous, and then also how to be a good steward.
I'm never living this down. Hey friend, I'm so glad you're still listening. I wanted to let you know that we will not have a new episode next week because our team will be releasing this year's Sisters message from Pastor Amy. You might remember us talking about her message in a bonus conversation we had with her earlier this year. So if you haven't listened to that episode yet, you definitely should. Maybe that's what you can use for your life group next week. Then we will pick up this season right where we left off. And remember, you can find out when new episodes release at www.life.church/YHIS. Have a great week.